Welcome to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. I'm your host, Shannon Ables. And whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, or sitting down with a hot cup of tea or a cafe au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Welcome to the 182nd episode of the Simple Sophisticate. Boy, am I excited for today's episode and to share it with listeners. Today, David Lebovitz is joining me on the Simple Sophisticate. You may know his blog, which he began in 1999. I know it was one of my first blogs that I've ever read, and it was the first food blog I ever read and still read. Before that, though, he was a pastry chef at Alice Waters' highly regarded Berkeley restaurant, Chez Panisse, for 13 years. And I have a feeling a few of you, probably more than a few of you, have one or more of his cookbooks in your kitchen. His new book is a food and Paris destination memoir about the purchasing and renovating of his Paris apartment. L'appart, the delights and disasters of making my Paris home, is being released this week. Take a listen to our conversation where David shares the one item in his new home that was nearly impossible to find, one of the challenges of writing the book, the unique discoveries he made about the French culture through this journey and how it differs from America. As well, I will ask him how he is surviving the current butter shortage in France. That is just a taste of what we're going to talk about. Here is my conversation with David Lebovitz. Joining me on today's episode of The Simple Sophisticate is Parisian-based food blogger, renowned baker and chef, and cookbook author, David Lebovitz. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Hi, Shannon. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, happy to chat with you.
Now, my first question out of the gate is more of an introduction to why you arrived in Paris. And I know that your book, The Sweet Life in Paris, goes into great detail as to how you came to move to Paris. And listeners, if you haven't read this book, this memoir already, it is a must read. I think you'll thoroughly enjoy it. But the reason I want to ask this question, you arrived in 2004. In your new book, L'appart, you share right out of the gates, I have not been a lifelong Francophile. And I really appreciate your honesty on this. So can you, just briefly share what tickled your fancy, your curiosity to ultimately come to Paris?
Well, it's interesting because after I wrote The Sweet Life in Paris, the question everybody wanted to ask me was, why did you move to France? And I never really knew until I finished this book. And I wasn't somebody who dreamed about living in France my life, but I was cooking in Northern California, and the climate's very similar to Provence. The feeling, the food is very lusty, lots of olive oil, garlic, fresh vegetables, nice weather, or so I thought till I moved to Paris and learned that the nice weather in Provence is not the same as Paris. And then I realized I had made a horizontal move. I had sort of moved from San Francisco to France, which seemed a lot more natural than if I, for example, moved from San Francisco to Texas. It was it was very similar. That's my reason, I guess, for moving there. It just felt like it was time to move and to go experience something else in my life.
And your loves were still there in Paris. The food, the culture, with regards to the appreciation of that.
Well, I always need to be around people and things that are interested in food because that's my life. And my partner always says, when you get together with all your friends, all you talk about is food. I'm like, well, what else is there to talk about?
That's true.
Luckily, he's French, so he likes to talk about food too.
That's perfect.
But it is something that, unites everybody, and it may sound cliche, but it's what actually makes us different and, what makes Americans different than Italians and French and Russians and Chinese people is food, but it also something that joins us. We all have to eat.
Right. We do. That's a good point. And all the different experiences that come with that.
I mean, that's really all we have to do in life is eat eat, drink, and reproduce. So
You make it sound simple, David.
Yeah.
I wish it was that simple, but it could be. It can be. I think that's a good point. If you get down to the basics of life, there's really not as much as we think that's absolutely important. That's a very good point. Now, you had lived there for 7 to 8 years and you'd been renting, but then you decided to buy and you also decided to stay in the same arrondissement that you had been living, the 11th. Can you share what you enjoy most about your neighborhood and why you chose to stay in this sort of less touristy arrondissement?
Well, it's funny because a few years ago, I was on book tour for another book and someone said, "Where do you live?" And I said, near Oberkampf. And they looked at me and they go, "Oh, do you take the train into Paris?" I'm like, I actually live sort of in the middle of the city. And it is actually a neighborhood that's become a lot more well-known because a lot of younger people have opened restaurants there. So it's sort of a happening area now, but it wasn't before. So I like the neighborhood because it's very diverse. It's a very large neighborhood. So it borders the Marais, it borders Père Lachaise Cemetery, and it borders Belleville, which is a very multicultural neighborhood. So like most neighborhoods in Paris, you can walk in any direction and be somewhere completely different within minutes. My neighborhood was like that, but even more so just because it was so huge. And I kind of wanted to stay there. And the other thing is there's a word that we use in English called hazing. In French, it's called the bizutage. When you move to a neighborhood, you sort of have to go through the hazing of getting to know the butcher, the bakery people, the people at the market. France is a culture where, often the first word is no. And it's not because they're necessarily rude. It's just because they don't know you. So why should they help you? So it's not like America where it's automatic. You walk into the store and everyone's like, "Hi, can I help you? Oh my God, Shannon, let me show you this dress. Can I call you Shannon? Oh my God." Slow down. So, and I like that too. I love coming to America and, having people help me. So when you move to a neighborhood, you have to get to know everybody. And once you do, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful experience. And it's something that a lot of Americans like about coming to France. They come and, a lot of the local people are nice to them. But I always tell people, if you come to Paris, go to the same bakery like every day, go to the same cheese shop. Because once you've been 2 or 3, once they see you're coming back, they know that you're sort of serious. And not necessarily serious and like, I can't make a joke, but that you're interested and engaged, and they like that.
They appreciate it. Well, and you were saying at some point in your novel, I keep saying novel, at some point in your memoir, that it's
yeah, no one believes it's true. People aren't going to believe it's nonfiction.
Gosh, you went through some some doozies, but you're getting invited to a special cellar in a few of the artisanal shops that they wouldn't invite the customers to because these people, they trust you and they trust that you sincerely are interested in what they have to offer.
Well, once again, France is about relationships, much more so than America. I do a tour once a year, and it's very interesting because a lot of people want to come to Paris and go on a culinary tour. They want to go on a day tour, but to go in behind the scenes and be with the chocolatiers while they're making stuff, they can't have visitors they're not there to be on tour. But the places we go are friends of mine, people I've known for 10, 15 years. And, I actually like doing the tours because I get to take Americans or other people to show them something of Paris where they wouldn't get to see. And the last few years, a lot of the guests have said, wow, what really impressed us was how close you were to these people and how they really like you. And I don't mean that, to sound conceited or ego. They're friends of mine. It's genuine. It's very nice. And I'm very touched when I do the tours as well and see that, how lovely they are to my guests and so forth.
And that makes sense. And I don't think you can fake that. And I think you're right. It takes time to build that. So that's a testament to your time in that neighborhood, which is why it completely makes sense you would stay there.
Yeah.
Your apartment, as you described it, is not a typical apartment. It's called an atypique. And when you walked in, at least based on your description, what I was drawn to in your description were the windows in this space. And it seemed that you were too, but I'm really curious, what was it that ultimately made you think, yep, this is the place that I want to make my home. I hope I can make this work out. You did. What was it that drew you into that space?
Well, I looked at a lot of places, and people in America don't unless you live in like a big city, maybe like New York. A friend of mine in Paris just had to find a new apartment. She looked at 100 apartments in less than 6 months. And they don't have open houses, so that means like make an appointment, go visit, talk, and so forth. So I visited a lot of places, and I talk about them in the book. Some of them, because otherwise it would be a 6-volume set of my visits to some pretty strange apartments. And Paris is a very quirky city, so a lot of the spaces aren't normal. There aren't boxy buildings where this apartment's going to be 500 square feet with a bathroom and a kitchen. I looked at one place and the toilet was next to the bed. And I was like, well, I guess that's actually convenient.
Yes and no. Comforting, but discomforting.
Yeah, but it's funny. I should have taken a picture of it. I was like, oh, okay. But people, have gotten creative over the years in converting spaces to living spaces. And so often you see places that are atypique or atypical. And in America, they might use words like, unusual, arty, loft-like.
Okay. Because your space is pretty open. It is similar to a loft in that regard, right? Because your kitchen is larger than the typical Parisian kitchen.
Right.
Okay.
Well, the Parisians often, people don't understand. Often Parisians like to have the kitchen away from everything else. They have it in the back of the apartment with a door because that's always where the help worked.
That was interesting to me when you shared that. I mean, are they still that way? If they don't go in and renovate, are they still?
Oh, yeah. And people actually like that. When I bought my apartment, as I mentioned in the book, my partner's father said, oh, you should put the kitchen down in the basement. And I was like, what am I, like this skullduggery maid?
I actually like working in the kitchen. I don't want it downstairs. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, put it down there so you don't have to see it. Okay.
So cultural differences coming through right there. That is interesting, but it makes sense historically. I guess you could say. I have a question about one of your delights, because you do have, even though there's a lot of disasters, you do have a lot of delights as well. And that one that I want to talk about is your farmhouse sink. And as you state in the book, we Americans, and I will include myself in this, dream about the farmhouse sink. But you had an interesting discovery. And if you could share that and as well share how you found your eventual sink that is now in your kitchen.
Well, like you, I wanted a French farmhouse sink. I just love the idea of a big, white, generous basin, maybe something that was kind of worn after time. And you could, it looked like you were on a farm and you could put produce in it. And those things don't exist in France anymore. So I said, if you want to find one, you've got to go to a farmhouse and rip it out of the wall. So that took me a few months to kind of figure out, with the internet now, it's so easy to find things. I could find anything within 5 minutes. That sink I could not find, and I'm good at finding stuff. Or I'm even better now. I've had a lot of practice. And it was kind of shocking to me because I was like, well, why can't I get one of these sinks? And somebody told me, they said, well, nobody cooks anymore. Everyone buys food at Picard, which is a frozen food chain that's very popular in Paris. And they do foie gras, and, you can get all the stuff that you can heat up. I don't do that. But people, once again, a lot of these French sinks, spaces are small in Paris and people don't have these large, generous sinks. So you would go to to the French countryside. So I looked and looked and looked, and I considered going to Britain because they have English farmhouse sinks. Okay. And they even sell those actually in the south of France to British people that move there because they all want those things too.
Okay.
But I worked on my search skills and I finally found one in the north of France. We drove up there to get it. And it was probably the most hard-won thing I've ever gotten in my life. And I just love that sink. And if anything ever happens to it, and actually something almost happened to it. We almost had to break it recently because the contractor had installed it incorrectly and it had a leak and we couldn't get to it. And the plumber came over and he's like, who installed this sink? And I was like, here, I've got a book for you to read.
Claude,
read
oh my gosh. He just brought so many stresses to your world. I don't even know how oh my gosh. I'll let the readers read the book to find out about those.
Okay.
But it's still in one piece. It's not, you didn't have to break it, evidently. I take it. It's all still functioning.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
So French people also like drama. So they see something like, oh, this is going to be really bad. And da, 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 da. And they fix it. I'm like, you said it was going to be bad. And they're like, oh, take back off.
That's not a big deal.
Like, okay.
Why all the drama up front? Okay. That's good to know, I guess, going in. Good to know going in. Now, what I like about your book as well is because you are a food blogger, you include a handful of recipes throughout the book. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, as I was prepping for the interview, I'm thinking there's a butter shortage going on in France right now. David, how are you surviving? Yes. And what's going to happen?
Well, fortunately, I'm in the U.S. for book tour for a while, so I'm missing that. But I did stock up. My local supermarket had a bunch of butter, and I bought 10 sticks of it. Although, it was interesting because I wrote about it on my Facebook page, and someone said, oh, first world problem. And I was like, people don't realize how important butter is to France. It's not considered a luxury item.
It's a part of the culture.
Yeah, it's part of the culture. And, the average person eats 18 pounds of butter a year in France.
Oh, okay.
And it's a lot of butter. It's kind of like bread. It's just something that people use. It's like olive oil if you're in the Middle East. This thing that you worship. It's like they need olive oil. It's their sustenance. So butter has a very culturally important place in France, like bread does, and not having it is kind of, a challenge. But I'm doing okay. I've squirreled away enough butter to last me, hopefully, through the holidays.
Before we get to the second half of my interview with David Lebovitz, I want to introduce you to the sponsors of today's episode. Owning quality clothing, well-made clothing, is an investment, and I have particular designers and brands that I trust, but I would prefer not to pay full price. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to Swap.com. Swap.com is the world's largest online consignment and thrift store. With Swap.com, you can save up to 90% off retail prices on your favorite brands like Lululemon, J. Crew, Nicole Miller, Talbots, Calvin Klein, and White House Black Market, just to name a few. With 6,000 to 10,000 new items added daily, you will have endless options to shop, and if something doesn't fit, enjoy hassle-free returns within 30 days, no questions asked. And as a Simple Sophisticate listener, not only will you save up to 90% off retail prices, but you can also save 40% off your first order with the code SIMPLE40 through November 30th and receive free shipping for orders over $10. Visit swap.com and don't forget to enter your special code SIMPLE40. That's swap, SWAP.com. If you're someone who loves essential oils, but the prices seem a little bit too high at times, I would like to introduce you to Simply Earth. Ditch the chemicals, have fun, and save money with Simply Earth's Essential Oil Recipe Box. Each box comes with 6 recipes and everything you need to make them. 4 to 5 full-size essential oil bottles, 100% pure goodness, all for $39. Use my coupon code for listeners of the Simple Sophisticate podcast, SIMPLE, to get a $40 gift card emailed to you after you subscribe to this fun essential oil recipe box. That's simplyearth.com and the code is SIMPLE. Welcome back to the interview. Let's find out how David approaches going to the markets in Paris. You get to a point in your book, and I had to reread this line a few times because I was like, wait a second, is that really what he just wrote? You said I had decided to move back to the United States. And I was like, whoa. Obviously, you still live in Paris. Your apartment is done. It's livable, and you are still there. But at that point, too many disasters had happened, and you couldn't remember the last time that you visited a market. Mm-hmm. And so much of what drew you to Paris, as we just spoke about, was the food and the artisanal local opportunities. And so I'm going to lighten this up a little bit. I would love for you to take us to a market with you, like virtually. How do you approach going to a market? What is it you're looking for? Say it's fall. What is that experience like for you, and what do you come home with?
Well, basically, I kind of know the seasons. Being from San Francisco, they say the joke is you only know what season it is if you go to the market because the weather in San Francisco is always the same. So I'm pretty attuned to seasons. And sometimes I'm going to the market with, I'm like, I need plums, or I need apricots, or I need to get a piece of beef or testing, or if I'm testing a recipe, or if I'm having a dinner party. The other side of me is I need to rely on serendipity, because sometimes things in Paris are like a feather. The more you reach for them, the more they elude you. So if you happen to need persimmons, they might have tons of them Saturday. Then you go on Tuesday and they're all out. And then next Saturday, I've got, it's like, okay, I get it. So what I do is I have certain vendors that I like. Some people I go to for certain, I'll go to for oranges. I know they have better oranges. Some people, one butcher I like because they have a really good pate made with duck confit in it. And it's really good. And I'm sure it's not good for me, but
You're
if I can't have butter, I'm eating that pate.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. If it's that good, it must be good.
And I also, I like to have shop where people let me pick out my own things. That's becoming a little more acceptable in France. A lot of Americans go to France and they're like, they won't let me touch the vegetables. They want to pick them out for me.
Yeah, you shared that. So they are shifting a little bit?
Yeah. I think it's easier for them too, because, they don't have to stand there and go, you have to go, I want that one. Okay, not that one. I want that one. Okay, no, that one. Not. And a friend of mine lives in the 16th, which is a very upscale neighborhood. And she said it takes her forever to go to the market because it's a lot of little old ladies and they want like 3 figs. And, and everyone, they want to talk about them and, da, da, da. When I go to the market, I kind of make a general survey and then I kind of go back and get everything that I need. And I try to get lighter things first, like cheese and so forth. And then I go back and get the heavier things if I'm smart.
Oh, I didn't even think about that approach, actually. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. Oh, that's a good idea. Well, and I enjoy following you on your Instagram stories because you do take us to the market on Instagram. And so we get to see it, the livelihood of it and the people and you said, funny. What's available.
There's a thing, the French people don't really like photos. They don't like photos of their things being taken, and they also don't like themselves being photographed, which I understand. So not everybody likes that. But I've been going to my market for 7 or 8 years, and I decided, I should do a post on going to the market. And I brought my camera. And as soon as you take out a camera, everything changes. And everyone's like, I'm like, they're like, what are you doing? I'm like, taking a picture of the carrots. They're like, why? Okay, and they're still like, it's been a few weeks. And the next few times I went, everyone was like asking me about camera. Oh, they got you had the camera the other day. I'm like, that was over. Yeah.
That was a while ago, but they remembered it. They definitely remembered it.
Yeah. I mean, now I'm like back to being a tourist again. I was like their buddy and everything before. And now I'm back to being the American with the camera, which is okay.
Well, and there's a question I have for you. You shared in your book that it took some time, but living in Paris awakened something inside of me that changed not only my cooking, but the kind of person I am. Without realizing it, I'd become entrenched in France and French culture, and France made sense to me. So I'm curious, What was it that Paris awakened, and how have you seen yourself change?
Well, the one thing, I'm not a very aggressive person. And you have to be aggressive in France. And I don't mean that in a bad way, like, being like a pit bull, but it is a Latin Mediterranean culture. And a lot of people are also very close to their roots, which means they're not sophisticated people. And once again, I don't mean that in an insulting way. It just means a lot of them are from the countryside where life was kind of simpler. But also, you sort of had to fight to survive. You had to go get, you had to be a little tougher because you were facing the elements and so forth. So I did have to learn to toughen up because life in America, for most of us is actually pretty easygoing. We go to the supermarket, everyone's nice. You need to I had to go to the bank when I was in the US and the other day, since I'm here for my book tour. And there was like a check someone had given me, like there was a problem with it. And the woman in France, it would have been like a big deal. It would have taken me like 3 weeks to resolve it. And I'm not exaggerating. And the woman goes, you know what? It's not a big deal. Here you go. We'll just deposit it. I'm like, okay. I mean, I was like, wow, that was easy. She's like, sure. Is there anything else you need? I'm like, will you come back to France and work?
Be my bank teller in Paris, please.
But, once again, it's not my culture.
Right.
I was a visitor. Now I live there, but you have to understand why they are the way they are. And one of the challenges of writing the book was talking about these things, but also putting them into context, saying why people are the way they are in France. Not just, oh, the woman shut the door in my face, but how you present yourself is very important in France. How you speak to people, what verb tense you use really affects the outcome of situations. And that's something that I really had to learn about. And it changes you. It changes the way you talk to people. It changes the way you see life, in fact.
Well, and part of, I'm when I talk about your partner, is it Romain?
Roman.
Okay. He's French. And so that seemed to be helpful as various times during the book. There were times that he just had enough with the French people, and he just spoke up, and he looked out for you, and he could tell that this was not right. How did he help you through this process? Because we do get to know him a little bit in the book as well.
Well, a friend of mine who knows him said, I didn't realize he was such a hero. One thing that French do very well is they don't attack you, they attack your character. So the worst insult in France is you're badly raised. If you tell someone they're mal élevé, it's a terrible insult. And my partner's father actually told Romain, he goes, you're badly raised. Why can't you be like David? I was like, wait, you're his father. You're the one who raised him. But it's also that sort of absurdity of France and so forth. Romain is very aggressive because that's what you sort of have to do to get things done there. And he's very in your face. And it's kind of amazing to watch because he's this little guy and he's very nice and sweet. But all of a sudden he can turn on a dime. And it's like, whoa.
Well, there were some beautiful moments of him just, this is not right. And I'll have none of that, I think is how you wrote that. And it was very clear that through him, you learned that, like you said, that aggressive aspect is kind of needed to survive and get along in Paris.
Yeah, and it's not considered, in America, that's considered a fault unless you're on cable news. Then it's like a good thing. But to us, it's kind of rude or considered, it's not, I don't want to create a fuss and I don't want to yell at anybody. Whereas there, it's not, people will get really mad and then they'll be over it.
I was going to say they move on. And then that's a good point. They don't hold that grudge. They just deal with it.
Shut up. It's like, wait, what happened?
Did we just turn the chapter page here? What happened? Yeah. That's what I noticed too in my interactions with more European people as well. Yeah.
Well, people are definitely more dramatic. And I don't want to say fiery, but it's much more emotional and so forth. So
yeah, they don't hold it. They don't keep it hidden. They confront it and move on. That's a good way of looking at it. You shared in your book that owning your own apartment made you feel like you finally belonged in Paris. And through this it was a 3-year process, correct?
It's actually going on its 8th year, I think now.
It's still ongoing. It's not officially
after
finished.
Finding the leak behind the sink. Yes.
Oh gosh. Oh no. Well, what was one of the big life lessons that you walked away with?
I think the biggest lesson was things going to happen to you that you don't really have a lot of control over. And not everything is going to be great, and that's okay. And it's actually, and the other part of that is it's okay to show your flaws. I actually like my flaws and I like other people's flaws, and I write about, French and American culture. And sometimes people go, why are you so insulting? And why don't you talk about this? I'm like, well, this is kind of interesting to me. I like flaws in people. I like the things that make us different. And so I kind of learned to embrace all those things, because that's what makes life interesting. Otherwise you sit at home and watch TV, watch E all day. That's not as interesting to me as going to a new market, going to a pastry shop I've never been to, going to a bakery. And once again, I've become more outgoing in a lot of situations. I'll just go into a bakery now and I'll start talking to people, because French people love to talk. And they're not so good at listening, but they love talking. But I like to go and engage people like the bakers and stuff. And when they see you're interested, especially, being an American, they're like, oh, you're interested in this? I'm like, absolutely. So, and that's a wonderful experience. And I've met a lot of people now. in Paris, and I go, about my daily life. And that's what makes it fascinating being there.
You've really made it your culture. I mean, you brought your culture to them, but at the same time, you seem to be fitting in quite well. And,
I hope so.
Well, if nothing else, thank you for bringing the culture to us through your experience. I thoroughly enjoy the people that I follow that are in France. That's what I wake up to in the morning, and seeing what you guys are doing and what the delight's like in Paris and anything. And those little simple things are quite fascinating to me.
Well, that's one of the nice things about blogging is that we're able to share things, and people are getting a glimpse into different lives other than their own.
Yeah, that's very true. And getting inspiration and seeing where people get inspiration. It's just everywhere. You can, as long as you keep your eyes open, is what I say. It's everywhere. As we wrap up, as a guest of our podcast today, you have the honors, David, of sharing this week's petit plaisir. What is a simple pleasure that you enjoy?
You know what I love is a really good cup of coffee. A few years ago, I was in Australia and I was sitting in a cafe and had a really good cup of coffee, and I almost started crying because it was warm and just delicious and it was perfect. And I always tell people you have to be like a molecular scientist to get my coffee right, the balance of everything. And I'm so appreciative of just a really good, simple cup of coffee, not hipster coffee, not,
cafe au lait. You're drinking a cafe au lait? Is that what you're drinking typically? Or?
I usually either drink an espresso or cafe au lait for breakfast. It really makes my day when it's perfect.
That sounds like the ideal simple pleasure. It is the epitome of a simple pleasure. David, I want to thank you for taking the time to stop by the podcast and share with us your journey. It was a true treat and pleasure.
That was great to chat with you too. Thanks, Shannon.
Listeners, David's new book is being released tomorrow, Tuesday, November 7th, Le Part, The Delights and Disasters of Making My Paris Home. Pick yourself up a copy and slip away to Paris, all the while being reminded that if you have a dream, so long as you have perseverance and patience, the impossible can indeed be possible. And in the meantime, stop by his blog, davidlebovitz.com. As I mentioned during the interview, in his memoir, he also includes more than a handful of recipes that coincide with the events that are going on throughout the book. I had to try one, and I'm happy to also be able to share the recipe with you as well as how mine turned out. What I decided to make was his bacon, green pea, and tarragon quiche. You make it as though you're making a tart, not the traditional quiche that I always think of here in the States. This is a classic French tart in that regard. You're going to use a tart pan. And I cannot even tell you how delicious this quiche is. And I'm a fan of quiches. I love quiches. But again, this is David Lebovitz, and he knows his pastry, and you're going to want to try it. He also provides in the book a variety of different substitutes for this recipe based on your tastes and the season and things along those lines. So be sure to check out the show notes, not only for a glimpse into this interview and the book, The Part, The Delights and Disasters of Making My Paris Home, but also to check out this recipe. David also sent me the picture of his French farmhouse sink that is in his kitchen. You can check it out on the show notes as well. I'll also provide links to his Instagram, his blog, and the post where he does go to the Paris markets. You can find all of these on the show notes for today's episode at the simplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast 182. Thank you for tuning in and have a beautiful week and start to the holiday season. Happy reading. Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. For more ideas and inspiration throughout the week, stop by the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com, or pick up the book, now available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon, as well as in paperback, Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, A Modern Woman's Guide. To stay caught up on the most recent episodes of the podcast, blog posts, and to receive exclusive news as well as an extra dose of inspiration to start your weekend, subscribe to the Simply Luxurious Life's weekly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox each Friday morning to enjoy with a hot cup of tea or a hot cup of coffee. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Shannon Ables. À la prochaine.